All right. I'd like to start off by saying Barakatah Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushai, Ba'ashem Rachakodash. All right. Welcome to another live lesson. The name of this one is Circumcision and Uncircumcision. And this is pretty much based off of a question that a brother had asked on the comment board. So Lord's will can get into it and make the lesson to be edifying. But want to make a quick comment real quick before I actually get into the lesson. As you see before you, there's a lesson that the Spirit had me do earlier. There should be mockers in the last time. Well, there was a brother on the comment board that asked a question, and I perceived this question wrong, and I answered him, the way I answered him, because I perceived the question that he asked me wrong. He said, "Shalom, brother, who are the seven heads?" And I didn't really pay attention to what video it was, so I'm thinking he's talking about the top seven back in the days from the old school. At One West, that was the first thing that came to mind. And I told him that goes back to the days of the school in Harlem. You wouldn't know who they were. So he comes back and say, "Oh, okay, I get it. So we wouldn't know who the seven heads are." He says, or do you know? My apologies, brother. I just want understanding. So I told him, it doesn't concern you, bro. Don't worry about it. Because the whole time I'm going back and forth with the brother, I'm thinking that he's trying to inquire about the seven heads, which I told him he wouldn't know who they are. But the Spirit had me look at it again. He said, "Oh, he's talking," because I realized what video was on, and he said he's talking about the seven heads as far as the beast is concerned. That's why he said, or do you know? My apologies, brother. I just want understanding. So I said, it doesn't concern you, bro. Don't worry about it. But then when I realized what he said, I said, "Salaki, bro, I thought you were asking about the top seven in the school before. My apology." So I put Greeks, Romans, Spanish, French, Germania Major, Germania Minor, and the British. So these are the seven heads in the book of Revelation, the seven heads and 10 horns. These are the seven heads, which the upstarts in this lesson that I did, through the Spirit, based off of a lesson that the brother Karatazar from Vegas did. They said they mentioned Russia, and then they're saying that the mark of the beast is not the microchip, blah, blah, whatever. So I'm like, where the hell these guys come from, first and foremost? And second of all, where did you learn all this other stuff from? You didn't get that on your own. You didn't pick up the Bible, start reading, and start talking about the seven heads being certain European countries. And that gave it away already. But even when they said Russia, that's a dead giveaway even more, because that was an old breakdown. And Russia is not a part of the seven heads. The only part that Russia has to play with the beast is that's going to be one of the major forces to destroy the beast, along with their allies and the allies of America. So without further ado, to get into the lesson itself, this is from a lesson Spirit had me do, was it January 13th, which is a couple of days ago, called Debate, with a bunch of question marks. And the brother came out here, GMS FAQ, or frequently asked questions. Says, "Shalom, Apostle Yahweh B'Shem Al-Shai, B'Shem Rakakodash, Barakatah. If it's not too much to ask, could you do one going over the circumcision and the uncircumcision, Babakusha?" And I replied to him, "Shalom, Khan, Lord's will." So in this lesson, we're going to go into it earlier this morning. A couple of precepts came to mind, so I jotted down, looked over a couple of them. I try to make this lesson concise, just for the sake of giving the understanding of what circumcision and uncircumcision is. Circumcision, you could use it twofold, meaning circumcision is actually getting circumcised, taking the foreskin on the penis the 8th day of when the baby's born and circumcising it. And also circumcision represents those that had the law. Okay, the law is also a representation of circumcision. The uncircumcision are those that didn't circumcise their children, that pretty much all their life were Israelites and didn't get circumcised. And also that being uncircumcised comes from the lack of knowing the law, and the circumcision of the law. So they will be known or classified as uncircumcision, as they were called by the Jews in Jerusalem. So these were Israelites that were being called uncircumcised or heathen or Gentiles by the Israelites in Israel and the surrounding areas that kept the laws, statutes, and commandments. And that's the short of it all. That's the simple and quick, fast track understanding. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into the book of Leviticus, the 20th chapter first. And when you read Leviticus 20 from the first verse on down, it pretty much speaks about not to send your children through the fire to Molech. It speaks about different perverted sexual acts. It speaks about adultery. It speaks about sleeping with your near kin. It speaks about sodomy. It speaks about bestiality. And these were all the things that the Lord is saying don't do. It's speaking about also dealing with those with familiar spirits and wizards and witches and all that. And this is what the people or the inhabitants of the land of Canaan, which is what it was called prior to our forefathers getting in there and changing it to the land of Israel. This is what they were doing in their land. And this is the reason why the Lord was going to kick them out, which goes back even further than that. During the time of Noah, his son Ham, which his son Canaan, which was his firstborn, he was the one that was in that land prior to us getting in there, and the Lord through Noah cursed Canaan for looking upon their father's nakedness, so he cursed them, and this is why we were justified in taking that land, and they were committing all these heinous acts in that land. So when we get down to the 22nd verse, right, it says, "You shall therefore keep all my statutes and all my judgments and do them." Why? Because these laws, statutes, commandments that the Lord gave to Moses to give to the nation of Israel was a guideline to separate us and make us holy from the other nations. So the Lord said, keep this. It says that the land whither I bring you to dwell therein, spew you not out. Why? Because if you don't, what's going to happen? The Lord is going to kick us out of that land. So it says, "And you shall not walk in the manners of the nation which I cast out before you, for they committed all these things, and therefore I abhorred them." And for you to understand what this means, I cast them out before them for they committed all these things. You will have to go back to the first verse and read on down to the 21st verse, and that'll give you the whole list, of the things they were doing. It says, "But I have said unto you, you shall inherit their land, and I will give it unto you to possess it, a land that floweth with milk and honey. I am the Lord your power, which have separated you from other people." And what separated us? The laws, statutes, and commandments, which made us holy, separate, above all these people, special, peculiar, above all these nations that were around, because the Lord never gave them the laws. Although certain nations kept certain things of the oral law, because the law was oral before it was written down, in stone and in parchment later on. It was oral, and there were certain nations that were keeping certain things, but they were never given the contract, of the law, statutes, and commandments signed in blood. So it says, "You shall therefore put difference between clean beasts and unclean." Why? Because if you don't put difference between clean and unclean, which the Lord gives a list in Leviticus 11 chapter, I believe that's Deuteronomy 5, if I'm not mistaken, or 14. I don't remember exactly which one, but pretty much this was a dietary law, because the law, when you look at it, is broken down into 4 groups, and I remember this easily because the individual that was in the school years ago, he said, just remember, if you want to understand the laws or understand the breakdown of the four groupings of the law, just remember MCDC. M, moral; C, civil; D, dietary; C, ceremonial. Moral, civil, dietary, ceremonial. And that's how the law is broken down into those four categories. So that's why we were supposed to put a difference between the clean and unclean. And that's why the Lord gave us a detailed list of the things we could and could not eat. Why? So that we would not become abominable. Because when we become abominable, what happens? We end up like those heathens. Therefore, we become what? Uncircumcised. And between unclean fowls and clean, and you shall not make your souls abominable by beast or by fowl or by any manner of living thing that creepeth on the ground, which I have separated from you as unclean. See? And it spoke about sexual depravities. It spoke about, not bowing down to idols, not sacrificing your children to Molech, not eating certain abominable foods, because all these things would make us to become uncircumcised. And you shall be holy unto me, for I, the Lord, am holy, and have severed you from other people, that you should be mine. All right? So with that understanding, moving on to the next precept in Deuteronomy, the 28th chapter, these were curses that came upon us. Deuteronomy 28 and 63, right? It says, and it shall come to pass that as the Lord rejoiced over you to do you good and to multiply you, so the Lord will rejoice over you to destroy you and to bring you to naught, and you shall be plucked from off the land whither thou goest to possess it, if we didn't do what? If we didn't keep his laws, statutes, and commandments. And the Lord shall scatter thee among all people from the one end of the earth even unto the other. And what happens when we get scattered among them? Just like the Lord said, make sure, take heed that you don't do according to the manners of these nations. And it says, and there, in wherever you spread out, wherever you're at among these nations around the world, thou shalt serve other gods, which neither thou nor thy fathers have known, even wood and stone. Because it tells us in Deuteronomy, the 32nd chapter, that any new god comes up, Jake is there worshiping him. It says the other nations do not change their gods, but Jake changes their power for every other thing out there that is not beneficial. And this is where the uncircumcision came into play, from being circumcised. So now let's go from there to the book of Hosea, the 1st chapter, and we're going to start at the 6th verse. It says, and she, meaning Hosea's wife, which was a harlot, for those of you that have a problem with harlots, and she conceived again and bare a daughter, and the Most High said unto Hosea, call her name Leruhamah, which the word Leruhamah is La'ah-Rachama, if I'm not mistaken, which is Rachama, or is a feminine way of saying Racham, which means mercy. La'ah-Rachama, not mercy, or not having obtained mercy. For I will no more have mercy upon the house of Israel, but I will utterly take them away. See, and the first of the kingdoms to fall to these nations, and that those curses in Deuteronomy 28 fell upon, was the kingdom of Israel, the northern kingdom, that fell to the Assyrians. All right? But this applies now to all of Israel that fell away, because we all fell away. Even the Apostle Paul quoted Psalms that none doeth good, no, not one. It says, but I will have mercy upon the house of Judah. And this is one of the reasons why the Jews in Jerusalem, which primarily comprised of Judah, Benjamin, and Levi, and some of the sprinkle of the other tribes that stayed, were considered to be separated from the other Israelites that fell away and started committing abominations. Because of scriptures like this, scriptures in the book of 2 Kings 17, where it says only the tribe of Judah remained, but eventually Judah fell also. All right. So it says, but I will have mercy upon the house of Judah, and will save them by the Lord their power, and will not save them by bow, nor by sword, nor by battle, by horses, nor by horsemen. Because eventually we all fell. And the Lord had to come back and deliver us, right? So it says, now when she had weaned Leruhamah, she conceived and bare a son. Then said the Most High, call his name Lo-Ami, which the word or the name Lo-Ami, La-A-Aim-Yah, means not my people. For you are not my people, and I will not be your power. So if we were not the people of the Lord, what did we become? We became heathens, because the Lord stripped us of the very thing that he gave us to separate us from these nations. So he kicked us out, put the curses upon us. And what did we do? Wandering from hill to mountain, from one government to another government, from one nation to another nation. And we were doing what? Worshipping their idols. So it says, yet the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured nor numbered. And it shall come to pass that in the place where it was said unto them, you are not my people, there shall be said unto them, you are the sons of the living power. Why? Because the Most High made an oath, a promise and an oath to Abraham, that he would set up his seed after him. So the Most High is a keeper of his word. So the Lord had mercy on the whole nation eventually. And this is why Yahushua came on the scene, to take away that sin that was there, that was embedded, that nothing else could take away but the precious blood of Yahushua. All right, so now let's go from there. Let's go to the book of Habakkuk. So when you go back into the history of the division of the kingdom of Israel, you'll start to get a little bit more understanding as to why the Jews or the southern kingdom put a distinction or a wall, so to speak, between themselves and the other Israelites. Because we got to remember, they understood the history. It's not like today. When you open up the Bible, these plantation Christians open up the Bible, they see that the Gentiles can be saved, or the Greeks, they're automatically thinking about Esau and other nations. It wasn't like that in the past. Our forefathers, they knew the history. They were keen to the history. They knew what happened to us. They knew that we went from nation to nation, that we fell, that we were worshiping their idols, that we became uncircumcised. They'd understood that. And when they said circumcision or heathen or Gentile, they knew exactly what they were saying. They were saying that these Israelites that fell away are acting just like these other nations. And this is why the Apostle Paul made this statement before I read this in the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 12 and 2. It says, you know that you were Gentiles, past tense, carried away unto these dumb idols, even as you were led, because this is what made you uncircumcised, by following after these other gods that are not gods. Okay? So going back to Habakkuk 1 and 5, behold ye among the heathen, and regard, and wonder marvelously. For I will work a work in your days which you will not believe, though it be told you. Why? Because these same Israelites that fell away were going to be brought back to the fold. Because the Lord had to build back the nation of Israel as he promised, because his name rides on it. So the elect that fell away at one time were going to be brought back. That's why he told Elijah that I have reserved to myself 7,000 men that have not bowed the knee to Baal. So although we all fell away at one time, the elect were going to be able to be brought back because they were sealed from the beginning. Now let's go from there to the book of Deuteronomy, the 10th chapter and the 12th verse. It reads, and now Israel, what doth the Lord thy power require of thee, but to fear the Lord Yahweh B'Shem thy power, to walk in all his ways, and to love him, and to serve the Lord thy power with all thy heart and with all thy soul. Meaning what? Not turning away to these idols. So it says, to keep the commandments of the Lord Yahweh B'Shem and his statutes, which I command thee this day for thy good. Behold, the heaven and the heaven of heavens is the Lord's thy power, the earth also with all that therein is. Only the Lord Yahweh Bashem Yahushua had a delight in thy fathers to love them. And this is why he gave us the laws, statutes, commandments that are written down in stone, cemented by the blood of these particular animals that the Lord set up to cement the contract between himself and us. And he chose their seed after them, even you above all people, as it is this day, because no other nation were given the laws, statutes, and commandments of the Lord, the Most High Yahweh. And it says, circumcise therefore what? The foreskin of your heart, and be no more stiff-necked, because that stiff-neckedness is what led us to be what? Become Gentiles. You know that you were Gentiles, carried away into these dumb idols, even as you were led. You know, and if you understand that history, you know, and if you're part of the elect, you'll start to understand why, when we read in the New Testament, it speaks about nations being saved, the Gentiles and the Greeks and the heathen. Because you understand that those are Israelites coming back out of that state. And this is the vision that Cornelius had when he saw the sheet let down to the four corners of the earth with all manner of unclean beasts. And the Lord told him, rise, Peter, kill and eat. And he said, not so, Lord, for nothing unclean has entered into my mouth. And he said, what the Lord cleansed, that called out not common nor unclean. And the so-called Christians in the churches take that to justify themselves being able to eat any abomination. Mainly that goddamn pig. Which the pig has their job on the earth. There's nothing wrong with a pig because they have their job to do, but they're unclean, so we can't eat that. Just like we can't eat other unclean animals, but they have their purpose on the earth. You know? But what that dream or that vision represented, as you read further down, the Lord, Peter came to the understanding, because it came to him 3 times, because he even said, the Lord has told me that I should call no man common or unclean. It was talking about the Israelites that were in that unclean, uncircumcised, heathenistic, Gentile, Greek mentality. That's what that dream represented, that vision represented. So it says, going back to Deuteronomy 10:16, it says, circumcise therefore the foreskin of your heart, and be no more stiff-necked. Now, let's go from there to the book of Romans. Romans chapter 2 and verse 25. And if you can't get it after this, you know, and after all these different lessons that have been done, then it's not meant for you to get it. Either you see it, but you don't want to see it, or the Lord just put blinders on you. Romans 2:25. For circumcision verily profiteth. So who is the circumcision? The Israelites mainly from the southern kingdom that were in Jerusalem, that were calling themselves keeping the law, statutes, and commandments. For circumcision verily profiteth, it profits. It says, if thou keep the law. See? And this is why we can't keep the law perfect. This is why we're rehearsing the righteous acts. Because if you break the law in one point, you're guilty of breaking the whole law. So it's impossible to keep the law. So it says, if circumcision verily profiteth, if thou keep the law, but if thou be a breaker of the law, thy what? Thy circumcision is made uncircumcision. And this is what happened to us. The Lord gave us the law, statutes, and commandments. And what happened? We became uncircumcised when we disobeyed and became stiff-necked. That didn't mean that mathematically, you know, the Israelites were born. The 8th day, the man child was circumcised. He's walking around. And one day at the age of 15, he's walking around. He commits a sin. And all of a sudden, he wakes up the next morning and a foreskin is back on his penis. You know, and he's wondering where that turtleneck came from. No, man. That's talking about becoming unclean, becoming unholy. As to before you were holy. And this is what happened to all of us as a nation. It says this, therefore, if the uncircumcision, meaning the ones that went off and became in that holy estate, keep the righteousness of the law, shall not their uncircumcision be counted for circumcision? So that's what it is. Because now what's happening is this portion of Israelites that went off are being cleaned up. And that's pretty much what the mystery of the Gentiles is. That's why the Apostle Paul said there's no difference between the Jew or the Greek. Why? Because they're both Israelites. It says, and shall not uncircumcision, which is by nature, if it fulfill the law, judge thee who by the letter in circumcision does transgress the law? Yeah, because you're talking about keep the law, but you ain't keeping the law. Now, let's go from there to the book of 1 Maccabees. And this is why it's so important to understand this part of the history of what happened during the Hellenization period. And if you don't know what the Hellenization period is, type it in and read and learn what was going on back then. The Hellen is a Greek way of saying Greek. All right. And there was a point of time where when the Greek Empire ruled, they were going around the world and mandating and pushing their philosophies on other nations. So when they conquered those nations were forced to keep their laws, keep their way of life, keep all the debaucherous things that they were doing. And that's what happened. It was no different for Israel, because we fell up under that captivity also. So 1 Maccabees chapter 1, verse 11, in those days went there out of Israel, what? Wicked men, who persuaded many. And this is what they did. They said, look, man, and this is what they said, saying, let us go and make a covenant with the heathen that are round about us, for since we departed from them, we have had much sorrow. And what happened? They became uncircumcised. Now, in this case, as we read further down, and it speaks about the uncircumcised, there was actually a actual custom. It started with the word epi something. I always forget the term. I believe it's a Greek term, and it literally meant to sew the foreskin back on the penis, because back then they were in the gymnasiums buck naked, and the actual heathen would know, no, you're a Jew because you're circumcised, so they actually did that. But when you look at it spiritually also, the Israelites became uncircumcised, as we read in the book of Romans, the 2nd chapter. Okay, it says, so this device pleased them well, because they persuaded many of Israel. Then certain of the people were so forward herein that they went to the king, who gave them license to do after the ordinances of the heathen. See, they were doing everything that these heathen were doing, exercising butt naked, eating pork, putting tattoos on them, shaving their beards off, worshiping their idols, going through their rituals. It says, whereupon they built a place of exercise at Jerusalem according to the custom of the heathen, and made themselves what? Uncircumcised. So this is twofold. But this was speaking about them actually sewing the foreskin back on their penis. But they also became uncircumcised, as we read the Apostle Paul said, you know that you were Gentiles carried away unto these dumb idols, even as you were led. It says, and forsook the holy covenant, and joined themselves to the heathen, and were sold to do mischief. And what happened? Their circumcised hearts became uncircumcised. They were no longer calling themselves Jews. They were no longer giving themselves Hebrew names. They were no longer circumcising their children. They were calling themselves by Greek names. They started learning the Greek language, the Greek tongue, adopted the customs. And in the process of time, what do you think is going to happen after a period of time? You're going to forget. Just like we forgot, the great forgetting. So now let's go from there to the book of 2 Maccabees, the 6th chapter, and the 1st verse. It says, not long after this, the king sent an old man of Athens to compel the Jews to depart from the laws of their fathers, and not to live after the law of the Most High, laws of the Most High. So this is what was happening. That Hellenization was going down. They would send certain officers to make sure that the people that they conquered were doing according to the business of the Greeks, and they even had other Israelites that were helping doing this. So it says, and to pollute also the temple in Jerusalem, and to call it the temple of Jupiter Olympius, and that in Gerizim of Jupiter, the defender of strangers, as they did desire that dwelt in the place. The coming in of this mischief was sore and grievous to the people, for the temple was filled with riot and reveling by the Gentiles. This talking about the actual Gentiles, the actual nations, who dallied with harlots and had to do with women within the court of the holy places, and besides that brought in things that were not lawful. So they were doing this in the Lord's sanctuary. The altar also was filled with profane things which the law forbiddeth. Neither was it lawful for a man to keep Sabbath days or ancient feasts, or to profess himself at all to be a Jew. So if you couldn't call yourself a Jew, what were you calling yourself? A heathen, a Greek. This is why the Apostle Paul said there is no difference between a Jew and the Greek. Why? Because they are all Israelites. So it says, and in the day of the king's birth, every month, they were brought by bitter constraint to eat of the sacrifices. And when the fast of Bacchus was kept, the Jews were compelled to go in procession to Bacchus carrying ivy. So what they were doing, they were just going totally off. Moreover, there went out a decree to the neighbor cities of the heathen by the suggestion of Ptolemy against the Jews, that they should observe the same fashions and be partakers of their sacrifices. So this thing was spreading. It says, and whoso would not conform themselves to the manners of the Gentiles should what? Should be put to death. Then might a man have seen the present misery. So like it for a minute. Okay, so now let's go from there. Let's go to Romans. Just building on the thing about the circumcision. Romans chapter, not 1, Salakia. Romans chapter 3 and 1. It says, what advantage then have the Jew, or what profit is there of circumcision? Much every way, chiefly because that unto them were committed the oracles of the Most High. And why was that done? Because the Lord said that the tents of Judah shall be saved first, so that the rest of the tribes will not magnify themselves against Judah, because Judah is the head tribe, the favorite tribe of the Most High. So that's why they were still kept within, because they were the ones that first received salvation. And this is why Yahushua went to them first. See? And then eventually Peter was sent to Cornelius, which was an Israelite. They didn't say what tribe he was from. And then the Apostle Paul was commissioned with going to the Israelite foreigners that were scattered abroad among the Greeks, and among all the other nations, in that region where he visited them at. All right, so now let's go from there. And let's see. Let's go to Ephesians chapter 2. So these the same that were circumcised, the same circumcision, this is what they said. This is Ephesians chapter 2, verse 11. Wherefore remember, this is the Apostle Paul speaking to the Israelites at Ephesus that will call themselves Ephesians, so on and so forth. So he's saying, remember that you being in time past Gentiles in the flesh, because you were uncircumcised. But this is what he said, who are called uncircumcision by that which is called the circumcision in the flesh made by hands, by those Jews in Jerusalem. That's what you were called, uncircumcised. And that's where that term came from. It didn't mean that they were actual heathen, but they were uncircumcised, like the heathen, both spiritually and physically. But then the Lord moved certain ones of them among the nation of Israel that were in that state, and brought them back to the fold. It says that at that time you were without the Messiah, Yahushai, being aliens from the commonwealth of Israel. And the commonwealth of Israel only pertains to the nation of Israel. Read Psalms, the 147th chapter, the 19th and the 20th verse, where the Lord only gave his law, statutes, and commandments to the nation of Israel, not to those other nations. And that's where the commonwealth went. It went to the Israelites, who were partakers of that inheritance. It says, and strangers from the covenants of promise. Why? Because you fell away, having no hope and without the Most High in the world. Yeah, because you were out there just like those heathens were, without hope. But the Lord was going to send hope. So this is why, before we read on, let's go now to Amos. Chapter 9, verse 11. It says, in that day will I raise up the tabernacle of David that is fallen. So the tabernacle of David consisted of who? All 12 tribes. So the Lord was going to raise them back up and set them back in order. It says, and close up the breaches there. What are the breaches? The breaches were the differences between the tribes. Them going back and forth, bickering and arguing, what the differences, and the calling of names and the accusations and the finger pointing and all of that. It says, and I will raise up his ruins, because we were ruined, we were destroyed as a people. And I will build it, as in the days of old. So the Lord was going to restructure everything back the way it was. And it begins with the knowledge. It begins with repentance. And this is why you had the gospel of reconciliation, which is the good news of those that were being reconciled or brought back into the good graces of the Most High Yahweh through his son Yahushai, the precious blood of the Messiah. And that's the truth of the mystery of the Gentiles, which were Israelite foreigners. So let's go from there to the book of Isaiah. Chapter 10. I'm sorry, not chapter 10, chapter 11. And we can start at 10. It says, and in that day there shall be a root of Jesse, which is who? Yahushai, which shall stand for an ensign of the people. To it shall the Gentiles seek, which are the Israelite foreigners, and his rest shall be glorious, because the kingdom of heaven will be glorious. It says, and it shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall set his hand again the second time to recover the remnant of his people. Why? Because we were scattered. And when we were scattered, we just read a few precepts here and there of what we were doing in these different captivities, and how we were going off into the worshiping the idols of these other nations, which shall be left from where? From Assyria, and from Egypt, and from Pathros, and from Cush, and from Elam, and from Shinar, and from Hamath, and from the islands of the sea. And even to this day, where we at? We're all throughout the world. And he shall set up an ensign for the nation. The ensign is Yahushai, this knowledge, this word that brings us back to redemption, reconciliation with our power Yahweh through his son Yahushai, and shall assemble the outcasts of Israel. Why? Because we were casted off. It says, and gather together this dispersed of Judah, which goes into the diaspora from the four corners of the earth, because Judah is everywhere, right? And in the midst of all of this, what's going to happen? It says, the envy also of Ephraim shall depart, and the adversaries of Judah shall be cut off. Ephraim shall not envy Judah, and Judah shall not vex Ephraim. Why? Because we're going to all be cool. The Lord is going to take away all those differences. He's going to bring back the brotherhood. He's going to bring back that family union. Let's go real quick to Zechariah. Zechariah chapter 11. And 14. Then I cut asunder mine other staff, even bands, which the word bands means to bind together, that I might break the brotherhood between Judah and Israel. But we're reading in Isaiah 11 that the Most High is going to do away with that. We read in Amos, the 9th chapter, that the Lord is going to close up the breaches thereof. And that's what was taking place during the time back 2,000 years ago, when the word was being taught back then. First, it was taught to the southern kingdom, then the rest of the tribes that were being brought back. And you had some of the southern kingdom that had got caught up into that whole scenario of becoming uncircumcised, into that Greek Hellenization. All right. So now let's go from there back to the book of Hosea 1:11 now. Then shall the children of what? Of Judah and the children of Israel be gathered together. That's why we're being gathered together now. Through what? Through the house of David, by the word of Yahweh Bashem Yahushai, and appoint themselves one head, being King David, because Yahushai is the ultimate head over us. Then you have King David as the leader or the head on the earth. It says, and they shall come up out of the land. For great shall be the day of Jezreel. And the word Jezreel, Yah Zerai Allah, means he is the seed of the power. You know, because these are the ones that the Lord cleaned up and brought back together. And when the kingdom is established, all Israel shall be saved in the long run anyway. Because that was a promise the Lord made to Abraham and to his seed. And the nation of Israel, so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native American Indians, and wherever they are scattered abroad in the world, no matter what they look like, are all a part of the children of the promise. That the Lord said he would make them as a multitude, you know, as the sands of the sea, as the stars of heaven, stars from heaven, which was a metaphor for an innumerable amount of Israelites. All right. Now let's go from there back to Ephesians 2, and let's finish out in Ephesians 2:13. But now in Yahushai, you who sometimes were far off are made nigh by the blood of Yahushai. And this goes into the book of Daniel, chapter 9, verse 7. O Lord, righteousness belong unto thee, but unto us confusion of faces, as at this day, to the men of Judah and to the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and unto all Israel, listen good, that are near and that are far off through all the countries whither thou hast driven them, because of their trespass that they have trespassed against thee. So to those that are near in Jerusalem, surrounding areas, and what? That are far off. That's why here, Ephesians 2:13, but now in Yahushai, you who sometimes were far off are made nigh by the blood of Yahushai. Because that was the agreement. You go off, you break the laws. If you don't become the sacrifice, you sacrifice these particular clean animals or clean fowl to be able to be forgiven, so that you can be restored. It says, for he, Yahushua, is our peace, who hath made both one, and hath broken down the middle wall of partition between us. The middle wall of partition beginning with that middle wall of partition that the Heavenly Father set between himself and us, and also the differences among the tribes. It says, having abolished in his flesh, the enmity, meaning the animosity, even the law of commandments containing ordinances, for to make in himself of two, one new man, so making peace. So this is both the kingdoms coming together as one, because that is the ultimate. And that he might reconcile, the word reconcile is to be brought back into the good graces unto the Most High, both unto the Most High in one body by the cross, having slain the enmity thereby. And he came and preached peace to you which were far off, and to them that were nigh, to both the kingdoms. We just read in Daniel, the 9th chapter, that this was talking about the ones that were near and the ones that were far off among the nations, which were Israelites. For through him, through Yahushua, we both have access by one Spirit unto the Father. And that's what the gospel of reconciliation is, the good news. That's what it pertains to. It says, now therefore you are no more strangers and foreigners, but fellow citizens with the saints and of the household of the Most High. Why? Because you are Israelites. And now you're being brought back into the good graces. You're able to partake of that commonwealth once again. It says, and are built upon the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Yahushua himself being the chief cornerstone, because that message that was given by Yahushua to his disciples, who later became apostles, was spread abroad to reconcile the Israelites that knew they were Israelites and the Israelites that didn't know that they were Israelites, that were a part of the elect at that time. In whom all the building fitly framed together groweth unto an holy temple in the Lord, in whom ye also are builded together for an habitation of the power through the Spirit. And this is why the Lord is able to work with the men, to inspire them through the Spirit of Yahweh Bashem Yahushai Bashem Rachakodash to teach this word, to teach the reconciliation. And that's the only reason we have this, because the Lord had mercy upon us. You see? So with that, there's many different directions, you can go with this lesson. Brothers have done many different lessons on the circumcision, the uncircumcision, and that whole history. This is one avenue, but there's so many, because there's so many scriptures on it, So with that, I pray that the brother's question was answered here, GMS FAQ. And I pray that you brothers in the comment board, and sisters have been edified. And to the next time I say, Shalom.